Hey folks, Brian Douglas from GitHub here, and I'm looking forward to sharing some maintainer tips that include GitHub Actions. So this is not just a GitHub Actions only chat. This is really more tips and tricks around GitHub, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with you at the end of the session, and well, after you've watched the session for the Q&A if you're available. All right, cool. So as I mentioned, my day job, I work for GitHub, and I talk a lot about GitHub Actions, and we're going to interweave a couple examples throughout the talk. But I did want to also set the stage of the project I actually maintain. So I have a first-hand experience in maintaining a project called Open Sauce. It's a project to find your next open source contribution. We're currently undergoing a lot of like updates, and we've got a designer helping with some contributions, which is really exciting. And so that's a lot of the context I get from maintaining open source. I do also meet with open source maintainers on a regular basis. So if you have any questions or feature requests and stuff like that, hit me up. I like entertaining all those ideas because I know the right people to talk to at GitHub on the product team. So in open source, we have this project called docs.opensauce.pizza. It's exactly what you think it is. It's a doc site for helping people to contribute to the open source project specifically and provide some insights and some knowledge sharing around like how do we build dark mode, or how do we build, how do we convert stuff to Vite? Because it's a React-based app, and Vite is a new build tool in the JavaScript ecosystem for, basically web. So the way we actually do all production and all sort of deploys for our doc site is using GitHub Actions. And we set the stage with our CI build system. And it looks like this, like on a release.yaml, every time something has been merged to the main branch, we actually cut a release at that point. And that release then triggers a deploy for the doc site, but also triggers a semantic bump of the version. And we're doing this all in the power of GitHub Pages. It's a powerful tool for hosting your doc sites as well. And you can now, GitHub Pages today is now powered by GitHub Actions and the Actions compute as well. So exciting stuff. There was a changelog quite a few months ago, and definitely check it out if you have any more interest or any sort of, if that has piqued your interest. Cool. So I'm just going to run through, I only have roughly like 10 minutes to actually go through all these tips. So I'm just going to run through a bunch of these. And the one is project tables. Project tables is something we shipped last summer. And it's a way to organize your work. Now, when I organize my work, usually there's some big events that happen around open source, and like we try to be a part of them as far as open source goes. So we have a project table called Good First Issue, or GFI, and we have a specific tab. Now, if you ever use any sort of project management tools, you might see a lot of similarities and be familiar with how this is working. But like previously, the only sort of view was Kanban for GitHub projects. We now have a table view, which is the project tables. And it gives me an idea of like what issues are open that are good first issues, because I'm filtering based on that label in existence. But then I'm also filtering for what status they're in. So if it's in pull request, or if it's done, or if it's up for grabs. It gives anybody who wants to come into the project who navigates to open source, because we participate in Hacktoberfest, an idea of this is our list of Hacktoberfest ready issues. And I like just pointing folks directly to that point, because otherwise a lot of folks will find your project, or it's mentioned somewhere in like one of the Hacktoberfest remote hacking parties. But there's not a lot of context of where they get started. So not just adding issues, but we actually have an entire list that we can share and point in our README. So that's what this is. It was actually extremely helpful because we have a good idea of like what is still up for grabs. If we need to go into Discord or go into another community to say, hey, we've got Hacktoberfest issues, come join us. And these were actually the issues we watched to make sure we have like a core maintainer team, and we made sure to also be responsive specifically for those issues, so we can track that, see who's on point for that. And it was very helpful during that process. The other thing is that, this is my list of issues, and I wanted to actually point out my next tip, which is going to be linked issues. So this is the issue right here, and linked issues. This is the actual the issue itself from the project table. So talking about linked issues, the one thing because of Hacktoberfest is we want to be able to identify if you have a pull request opened, it's a requirement to have a linked issue directly directed to that pull request. And not a lot of people are aware of this, but some of us, I mean, these are maintainers who are in this audience, but you might be already familiar with linked issues. we actually have created a GitHub action to confirm that a linked issue is actually linked inside of a pull request, which I'll mention in a second. And the way you link issues, for those who are not aware of this, because I know we do have some beginners in open source also watching this content. To link an issue, you just do the # in the issue number. You can also go to the right sidebar of any pull request and then link the issue directly using the settings widget as well. So what I'm getting at is like, we actually make this a requirement for any pull request, especially during Hacktoberfest, because there is a lot of, how I would say, like unsolicited pull requests that aren't associated to an open issue. So a lot of our massaging or onboarding new contributors is really encouraging people to just open an issue before you open that PR. It gives us context, and it also helps you to make sure your contribution will be merged. Another way we also do this is like with our issues, we actually use issue forms. So here's an issue form that we have. We've set up this with the YAML. So this is that feature built in GitHub today. And we require people to, if you're going to describe a bug, you describe it in the context of the form. A lot of times and historically with these templates, folks would just delete exactly what was there. And it could be really challenging to sort of like entice people to provide enough context. So like, tell me what browser the bug is. Tell me what version of the actual library you're using. All this can actually be added. What we use is the .github folder, which is a whole nother tip, .github repo. And you can actually add all your templates to that repo, and it'll be added to every single repo inside your organization. Now, some people might not want that, but we find it extremely valuable because we have a lot of similar projects like the doc site, the main site. We have another thing called hot-open-source.pizza. This now gives us consistency across the board of issue forms, so all bug reporting is consistent across all repos. The other thing that we leveraged a lot in the last year is GitHub Discussions, and this is mainly it's things like the GitHub action that I had mentioned. It actually started as a GitHub discussion. So we had one contributor actually talk. We actually had a conversation in Discord because I push most of my contributors to Discord because that's a real cool way to get intro conversations, synchronous conversations. And MT Foley actually mentioned, hey, we had this conversation about linking PRs and how to encourage people to add linked issues. That conversation happened in discussion. We had the discussion. We came up with an answer and a solution. And I was able to mark that answer and solution. So like if you have a question that comes up or a FAQ that comes up all the time for your project, it's nice to have a discussion and have a marked answer. So that way people can identify if they have that same question, they can find it through Google searching and etc. So we ended up coming to that solution. We talked about how to build it. It exists today as the PR compliance action. So that linked issue thing I talked about before, this is the action that was built by Matt to help encourage Hacktoberfest contributors to create issues or link issues in their PRs. Now, the one thing so we're talking about actions, and I mentioned it. We probably thought like, oh man, he's not going to talk about actions. We're going to talk about actions here and now. So reusable action workflows is something that's also newer in the last 6 months. And that same PR compliance workflow, we're checking for titles. We're checking to see for our semantic release to see if they have the tag for feature or bug or fix. This is required. It's all in our contributing MD as well, and encourages people to sort of learn the ropes of how to contribute to open source by contributing to open source. So that's the whole gimmick there. So there we have an action, and this I just sort of brought up the screenshot of the action runner, the checks themselves, and it shows that we're checking to see if the compliance action it actually sees if the context is there. So that is that's the gist of it. Like we can go into way more detail about how this is built. I'm using the pull request target, making sure it only runs specifically on opened and edited pull requests. We're also not giving access to code or anything like that because when you run GitHub Actions on a fork, you open your footprint for security up a bit wide when you allow forks, which is how open source works. So the permissions flag on line 11 is something that I'd really encourage anybody who's not familiar to start leveraging that in some of your action workflows if you are using GitHub Actions, because it gives us we can close the footprint a bit about security. And then the reusable workflows are what I was getting at. This is a workflow, this compliance workflow is a workflow we're using all over the place in all different types of repos. And because it's just a built-in solution that we just use in every new repo we create in the open source org, we can now reuse that from the open source repo, the .github repo, ever we want. And we don't have to build that entire YAML structure because it's already been discovered. We already built it once. Now we just want to reuse it in multiple places. So definitely would love feedback on this feature. If you have it, just hit me up in like a DM, find me in the chat, and I'm super available on Twitter as well. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is generating release notes. Now, this is something that I'm really excited about because I actually chatted with the team about a ton. But when you go to do all these release and cutting the releases, you can actually auto-generate release notes using this new button. So if you aren't doing releases now, I encourage you to do that because it's an easy way for new contributors to come through and try to figure out like what happened before, what was the next version, who would participate in that. And the benefit is that it actually includes first-time contributors as part of this. So if anybody made a first-time contribution, it's a nice little hello, thank you so much for your contribution. And then like a way to get highlighted as well. Cool. So this is me on GitHub. I'm B-Dougie, and I really appreciate the conversation. Well, it was one way. I just talked to you, but would love you to reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions or if you have any other tips. All right. Cheers.